welcome to There It Is podcast mini episode, a comedy podcast to help you find your inspiration with a quick tip. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thanks so much for giving us a listen today. This is mini episode number 34, which means there are 33 other mini episodes in the feed. So give those a listen when you get a chance, which will begin as soon as this episode is over. The tips I share in these mini episodes are not always just mine because, look, I don't know it all. Over the years, I've heard what professionals and experienced comedians have said, and I have gotten more experience. So sometimes I might give my take, and other times I'm giving takes of what I learned in a class or an interview that I read or saw. I think it's good to share tips you've heard, so please share the tips you've discovered with us on social media at There It Is Pod on Threads, Facebook, and Instagram, or on this episode's post on our website, thereitispod.com. Today's topic is not saying straight man. So you've heard that term a million times. You know, they were referring to someone who was playing the straight man in something, and by that, they didn't mean a heterosexual. The term straight man these days is considered an outdated term because when people hear straight, they're thinking about sexuality or sexual orientation. Since the position of the so-called straight man in comedy is to be kind of the normal one in the show or movie, it feels too much like they're saying it's normal to be straight. So people want to shift the term to something else. For a while now, people in comedy have used voice of reason as an alternative. That's fine, but I think it's not updated enough to our current world of comedy. Now, I have talked about this subject a couple of times in episodes of the podcast, long episodes of the podcast, but I wanted to have an episode where I break down the history of the term straight man and how we can move forward with a new, more accurate, fitting term. Let's go way back to the era of double acts, comedy duos, and vaudeville. The straight man was also referred to as the comedic foil. The comedic foil was really kind of there just to set up the funny thing that the eccentric character was going to do, the funny one. Really, they were just there to essentially be what was referred to as a stooge to that eccentric character. They were the ones who was going to get humiliated in some way. This sort of got altered in the era of Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello because Abbott wasn't like the stooge. He wasn't the one who was going to get hit and beat up, and Dean Martin certainly wasn't. Their setup was essentially Dean Martin was trying to sing a song and woo some lady, and Jerry Lewis was interrupting it by being a complete buffoon. So the style of comedy was just very different than what we see now. That's part of the reason why the term straight man doesn't work as well. But another thing that kind of, I won't say confused, but altered all of this is the fact that the Three Stooges came along. I mean, if Stooge was supposed to be the sort of normie in a scene, well, those guys were not the normies. They were all eccentric, but they were getting beat. They were getting beat up, usually at the hands of Moe, but he also was getting hit, and, you know, the world was kind of dumping on all of them. So the term stooge kind of takes on a new position in how comedy is played. But the straight man was becoming the more Dean Martin type and not the stooge type or the comedic foil, so to speak. But if you fast forward to 80s and 90s sitcoms, there are comedic foils. There are stooges. Sometimes it's a main character, but not the main character. And I'm looking at you, Family Matters, because I do kind of feel like Carl Winslow was a bit of a stooge on that show. because he was sort of the one who was going to get the most worked up at something Urkel was doing, and Urkel would succeed in some way. But the position of a stooge in an 80s or 90s, especially a 90s sitcom, was really someone who was just in that one episode. They were going to be made to look a fool by the end of the episode so that the heroes could win. It was somebody that the audience could feel superior to in some way. But that is not really how we view the straight man when that term is being used. That position is a lead usually, and they are the normal person who is using common sense that the audience understands. The audience is essentially supposed to see through their eyes. We just need to use a different term for it. Now, the voice of reason is that term that many people have used, but as I said, I don't think it goes far enough because it doesn't apply to every situation where there is this position that we're talking about. The reason I say that is because so many times that person who's being referred to as the voice of reason is not really that reasonable. Some people might say Moe from Three Stooges is the voice of reason. They're all stooges. They're a different position. But if you want to look at it as Moe versus the other two, sure, I guess he's that position, but he's an idiot. And the rest of the world are the ones who are actually normal in that world. Like Moe is not the normal one. He is not reasonable. He's just more reasonable than Larry and Curly. But a good example of this position is Michael Bluth from Arrested Development. But here's the thing. Michael isn't all that reasonable. He's just more reasonable than the rest of the Bluths. So voice of reason doesn't really always fit for me. What I think works is the grounding force or the tone setter. I say use either of those because they both work better than saying voice of reason does. The tone setter, the grounding force, can be a reasonable person, but they can also not be a reasonable person. Take a lot of Ben Stiller's work, like Tropic Thunder or Zoolander. He's the lead. And especially, probably particularly in Tropic Thunder, he may be viewed as the straight man. But that character is an idiot. He is lampooning actors in Hollywood who take themselves too seriously but are delusional. That is that character. Zoolander is an even dumber version of that. Neither are particularly reasonable, even if you can understand where they're coming from. But what does fit is saying that they are setting the tone, because the tone of Zoolander is set by the character Zoolander. It shows you the level of silliness that is going to be normal in this movie. It's not reasonable. It's not logical behavior, but it is the tone of the movie. So anything else that happens can be grounded by that. And with Tropic Thunder, it works that well too. Like if you had someone who was normal in Ben Stiller's position in that movie, then maybe the other stuff seems a bit too off kilter. It doesn't seem like it's in the same world. However, with Ben Stiller being as weird and peculiar as he was in that movie, it sort of sets a tone that gives permission for the other characters to be as wild as they are and as eccentric as they are, because the ground floor is not normal. It's not what you and I understand the world to be. We sort of act as the voice of reason in that sense. You and I know how people are supposed to behave. None of these people are doing that. That's why I think saying the tone setter or the grounding force works. The world of the movie or the show might be pretty wild, pretty eccentric, but the grounding force in that lets you understand, okay, this is what's normal in this world. They set a tone of being a bit goofy or eccentric or dumb, so it makes the other characters make sense. This is why I prefer that term. Voice of reason, I don't think necessarily gets to that because you automatically think, oh, this person is supposed to be reasonable when they're not. You essentially have to have a bridge between the audience and the world you are creating with a character in the piece. If the piece is pretty straightforward and the comedy comes from observational humor, then that grounding force needs to be a voice of reason, someone who thinks like you and I think, someone who is normal. But if the world is kind of wild and you're doing satire, that's when you have to think, well, wait, what is going to make the audience understand this world? Who can be in between, who can maybe not be as reasonable as the average person, but they aren't as wild or dumb as the dumbest person in this piece that I'm making. Now, it's different from improv because you don't know where any scene is going to go while you're doing it, but you have to be aware of the tone as you are doing it. And what I mean by that is when you're putting out stuff, when your scene partners are putting out stuff at that top of the scene, one of the things you have to observe is what kind of vibe is this? Is this a world that is like the world we live in, or is this a really wild world where the dumbest things happen? In those sort of situations, you have to go, okay, what dots do I need to connect so the audience can follow the logic that the just ridiculous logic our characters have? That's where we will need to do a little extra work on our feet, but it comes from observing the vibe in the room and on the stage. So think about things from the context of the grounding force or the tone setter instead of the voice of reason. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a position of being the voice of reason or the stooge / comedic foil. Those positions still exist, but the way people are trying to apply voice of reason isn't accurate enough to these other sort of instances that I see more often. I see people who are not reasonable more often in comedy, even when they're the main character that we are rooting for, and they are not the wildest, dumbest, most eccentric character in the piece that I'm watching. So I hope that helps. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. Thanks for listening to this mini episode. All episodes of the podcast are available wherever you get podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at There It Is Pod, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at There It Is. And follow me on Instagram and Threads at Jason Farr Pics. Also subscribe to our comedy lifestyle newsletter and support us if you can. We have a Patreon and a PayPal. Go to thereitispod.com for newsletter and support info. Links in bio. Until next time, be good to each other. It's a moral imperative.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.